These three disturbing Appalachian Mountains horror stories are inspired by real events. First, a veteran hauler vanishes on the Blue Ridge Parkway, leaving behind a running truck and a blood-drenched cab. Next, the park's deadliest mile incinerates two safety experts in a baffling, fiery catastrophe. And finally, a ranger screams about lights before being violently snatched into the dark. Make sure you watch until the very end, because the forensic impossibility found on his body proves that despite being miles deep in the wilderness, he never took a single step. These three... When experienced truck driver Theron stopped to pick up a hitchhiker on the Blue Ridge Parkway at 2:47 a.m., he had no idea he was about to disappear into the same dark legend that has claimed dozens of travelers on this stretch of highway for over 50 years. You have to understand the kind of man Theron was to understand why this case sits so heavy on the people around here. 32 years old, a professional. He wasn't some tourist rubbernecking at the leaves changing color. He was a man who made his living moving heavy steel across the asphalt. He knew the Blue Ridge like the back of his hand. He knew where the grades got steep. He knew where the fog settled in the hollows. And he knew the rules. Rule number 1 in the mountains after midnight is you keep those wheels turning. You don't stop. And you definitely don't open your door for strangers. That's what makes March 15th, 2021, so hard to figure. Security cameras caught the start of it. It was near the entrance to Shenandoah National Park. The footage is rough, grainy, black and white, fighting against that thick mountain mist that comes down like a curtain. The timestamp read exactly 2:47 in the morning. Theron's rig pulls into the frame. You can see the marker lights cutting through the gray. He pulls over to the shoulder. Now, right there, that's the first thing that doesn't fit. Theron was 47 miles off his intended route. In this line of work, you don't take a 47-mile detour for fun. You run a tight log. Every mile costs fuel and every minute costs money. For him to be there that far off the main haul means something was already wrong before he even hit the brakes. On the tape, a figure steps out from the tree line. Tall, dressed in dark clothing from head to toe. You can't make out a face, you can't make out any details. It's just a shadow that moves with a purpose. The figure walks up to the passenger side of the cab. The door swings open. The figure climbs up. The door shuts. And that's it. That simple mechanical action, a door closing in the fog, was the last time anyone saw Theron alive. When the FBI got involved, they started digging into the GPS data from the truck. That's when the timeline started to get scary. See, a GPS doesn't lie. It tells you exactly where a man went, even if it can't tell you why. The data showed that after picking up that passenger, Theron didn't turn around. He didn't get back on the main highway. He drove that massive rig deeper into the dark. Local investigator Raylan, a man who's been working these hills for 20 years, took one look at the route and shook his head. Theron had turned onto a network of old service roads and logging trails. These aren't roads made for an 18-wheeler. These are narrow, twisting tracks cut into the rock 50 years ago. They are treacherous in a pickup truck, let alone a semi. You have switchbacks that are barely wide enough for the tires. You have drops on the side that go down hundreds of feet into black nothing. Raylan noted the pattern immediately. He said it looked like the driving of a man who was either completely lost, which doesn't happen to a pro like Theron, or a man who is being directed. It's the kind of route you take if you want to disappear. If you want to go somewhere where the cell towers can't reach you and the police radios turn to static. For 3 days, the mountain kept quiet. No calls, no pings, just silence. It wasn't until Ranger Blevins was out on patrol that the silence broke. Blevins was checking a remote fire trail miles from anywhere, near Milepost 289.8. It's a spot locals know well. It's deep in the woods where the canopy is so thick it blocks out the sky. Blevins came around a bend and saw the truck. It was parked on a gravel switchback. It wasn't crashed. It wasn't stuck. It was just sitting there. But as Blevins got closer, he realized the situation was wrong. White smoke was puffing steadily from the exhaust stack. The engine was running. A big diesel engine like that has a sound you can feel in your chest, knock, 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 knock. It's a steady, mechanical rhythm. In the dead quiet of those woods, where usually the only sound is the wind in the pines, that engine noise would have been loud. It had been idling for who knows how long. Just sitting there, burning diesel, keeping the systems alive. Blevins walked up to the driver's side. He was cautious. You find a running truck in the middle of nowhere. You don't just barge in. He checked the door handle unlocked. He pulled it open. The heat hit him first. The heater in the cab was cranked up high. It was blowing hot, dry air into the empty seat. Blevins climbed up on the step. The cab was empty, but it wasn't abandoned in the usual sense. Theron's keys were still in the ignition. The metal keyring was shaking slightly from the motion of the engine. His wallet was gone. His phone was gone. But everything else was neat. No trash on the floor, no signs of a panic. It looked exactly like Theron had stepped out to check a tire, or maybe relieve himself in the bushes. It looked like he planned to be back in 30 seconds, but 30 seconds had turned into 3 days. This is where the horror sets in for people who work the road. A truck is your lifeline. It's your shelter. You don't walk away from a running rig, you don't leave the keys in it. And you certainly don't leave it unlocked in the middle of the woods. The truck's sitting there, idling away, waiting for a driver who wasn't coming back. That's a picture that sticks with you. Blevins called it in, and the site turned into a circus. The FBI arrived in force. They brought in forensic teams, guys in white suits dusting for prints on a dirty truck in the middle of a forest. They taped everything off. They checked the sleeper berth. They checked the tires. They checked the undercarriage. Then they opened the passenger door. And the story went from a missing person case to something much darker. The crime scene techs found the blood. It was on the passenger side floorboard, a dark reddish smear that had soaked into the rubber mat and trailed up onto the fabric of the seat. It wasn't a bloodbath, but it was enough to turn your stomach. In the bright lights of the forensic lamps, that copper color stood out against the gray interior. Blood is a fact. You can explain away a detour. You can explain away a missing wallet, but you can't explain blood in the cab of a truck. It means violence. It means Theron didn't just walk away. It means there was a struggle right there in that warm, noisy cab. But here is the part that keeps investigators awake at night. If there was a fight, why was the rest of the truck so clean? Why was the engine left running? And where was the body? They brought in the search dogs. These are animals trained to find people, alive or dead. They put their noses to the ground and started working. They went in circles around the truck, widening out into the trees. They scrambled up the steep embankments and down into the gullies. Search teams used thermal imaging cameras. If you've never seen one, it turns the world into blue and orange. A living person glows bright orange against the cold blue of the woods. They scanned every inch of that mountainside, from the valley floor where the creek runs, all the way up to the rocky ridgeline. They found nothing. No heat signatures, no scent trails that led anywhere, no weapon, no sign of the tall figure in dark clothing. It was like the earth had just opened up and swallowed them whole. The only thing left was the truck chugging away and that stain on the floorboard. The FBI put up a reward, $20,000. That's life-changing money for some folks around here. They put posters up at every gas station and diner from Virginia to Tennessee. They wanted a lead. They wanted to know who that hitchhiker was. But 3 years later, that money is still sitting in a bank account. The case is active, but it's cold. If you talk to the Rangers, though, they'll tell you this isn't the first time. Since 2019, there has been a spike in reports right around Milepost. 289 people driving through at night claim they see things. Hitchhikers. Always tall, always dressed in dark clothes. They don't have thumbs out. They don't wave. They just stand there on the shoulder, perfectly still, watching the cars go by. And they are always standing in the dead zones, the deep pockets of the road where your cell phone bars drop to zero. The locals know the history. They talk about the 1970s. Back then, there was a rash of traffic fatalities and disappearances on this same stretch of road. There was a man named Corbin who vanished back then. Same story. Car found abandoned, engine running, driver gone without a trace. They call it the ghost hitchhiker legend. They say there are things in these mountains that get hungry, things that use the road like a hunting ground. They say Theron didn't pick up a drifter. They say he picked up something that belongs to the dark. Maybe that's just folks trying to make sense of something that makes no sense. Maybe it was just a robbery gone wrong. But a robber takes the truck. A robber takes the cargo. A robber doesn't drive 47 miles into the woods just to leave the keys in the ignition. The scariest part of this story isn't the ghost legends. It isn't the blood. It's the mechanical reality of what Blevins found. Think about it. That massive steel beast parked alone in the fog. The white smoke rising up into the trees. The heater fan blowing hot air. The engine turning over, thousands of times a minute. Burning fuel, keeping the oil pressure up. Doing exactly what it was built to do. It sat there for 3 days. Through the sunrise and the sunset, through the rain and the mist, just idling, waiting for a hand on the gear shift that was never going to touch it again. So if you're ever driving the Blue Ridge Parkway and you see Milepost 289 coming up in your headlights, check your fuel gauge, check your locks, and don't stop. Because there are plenty of legends in these mountains, but the one about the truck that wouldn't stop running? That one is true. And whatever climbed into Theron's cab that night might still be out there, waiting for the next ride. Even National Park Service employees who knew every danger of the Blue Ridge Parkway weren't safe when Thane and Della's vehicle suddenly went off the road near Milepost 11, proving that some stretches of highway are deadlier than others, no matter how well you know them. You'd think a badge and a paycheck from the government would buy you some kind of protection, or at least some extra luck, but asphalt doesn't care who signs your checks. Thane was 43. He was a seasoned National Park Service employee stationed right there at the Blue Ridge Parkway Visitor Center. He saw the reports, the maps, and the warning signs every single day. Della was 37 and worked for Virginia State Parks. Between the two of them, they had decades of experience. They weren't tourists rubbernecking at the leaves. They knew exactly what that road was capable of. But on the night of April 23, 2023, all that knowledge didn't amount to a hill of beans against the simple, brutal physics of the mountain. You have to understand the ground we are standing on here. This isn't just a scenic drive. The Blue Ridge Parkway has a reputation among the people who have to clean up the wrecks. Data from 2022 showed that 69% of the fatalities on this stretch were ruled suicides. Think about that number for a second, 69%. It is officially designated as the deadliest road in the entire national park system. It's a place that draws people in who don't want to leave, but it also catches the people who are just trying to get home. The stretch between Milepost 0 and Milepost 15 is the worst of it. It has the highest concentration of fatal incidents per mile. It's a gauntlet. The curves are tighter, the drops are steeper, and the shadows seem to hold on to the pavement a little longer than anywhere else. Thane and Della were driving right through the heart of that danger zone. It was night. Darkness out there is heavy. It sits on the windshield like a physical weight. Inside the car, everything felt normal. That's the trick the road plays on you. It lulls you into thinking you're in a living room that moves. The heater was blowing warm air. The dashboard lights were steady. The engine was working with a consistent mechanical rhythm. They were likely talking shop, discussing the very safety issues they dealt with professionally. They knew about the lack of lighting. They knew about the inadequate barriers. See, that's the difference between an interstate and a parkway. On the interstate, you have floodlights, you have wide shoulders, you have galvanized steel guardrails designed to catch a mistake and spit you back out. Up here, you don't get those margins. You have a narrow lane, a strip of soft dirt, and then a tree line that hasn't moved in 100 years. They were coming up on Milepost 11. This spot is notorious for nighttime single-vehicle accidents. The road geometry there is unforgiving. If you take your eyes off the blacktop for 2 seconds, to check a mirror, to change the radio, to look at a deer on the edge of the woods, you lose your line. And that is exactly what happened. Suddenly, without a screech of brakes or a warning shout, the vehicle left the roadway. It wasn't a drift. It was a departure. The passenger side tires hit that soft shoulder I mentioned. When dirt is soft like that, it grabs the tire. It pulls the car in. The steering wheel would have jerked in Thane's hands, a violent mechanical shudder that tells you you've lost control before your brain can even process it. There was no guardrail to stop them, nothing but physics taking over. The car plowed off the embankment. It didn't roll, it slid. It turned into a sled of steel and glass, carrying 2 experts toward an inevitable stop. That stop came in the form of a massive tree. The impact was absolute. The front end of the car crumpled. The engine block was shoved backward into the cabin. Metal sheared and glass shattered into dust. It was a sound that would have echoed through those mountains for miles. A singular, destructive crash that signaled the end of the journey. But the crash wasn't the end. Immediately upon impact, the vehicle caught fire. It wasn't a slow build, it was instantaneous. A fuel line ruptured, a spark jumped from the battery, and the vapors ignited. Whoosh. Just like that. The car became a furnace. The flames wrapped around the frame, fed by the gasoline and the oil and the plastics inside the cabin. Thane and Della, trapped inside that crushed metal shell, never had a chance to fight their way out. When the fire burns that hot and that fast, it changes the air. If you were standing on the road above, you would have smelled it. Not just the smoke of wood, but the acrid chemical stench of melting tires, the sharp stink of burning upholstery. And underneath that, the terrible copper scent of tragedy. It took hours for the scene to be cleared. When the investigators arrived, they had a job to do. They had to look past the tragedy and look at the facts. They knew the victims. That makes it harder, but it also makes them look closer. They wanted a reason. They wanted something to blame that wasn't just the road itself. They stripped that wreck down. They looked for mechanical failure. Did the brakes snap? Did the steering linkage bind up? No. The car was sound. They looked for foul play. Was there another car involved? Did someone run them off the road? No. There was no paint transfer, no skid marks from another set of tires. They looked at the victims. Both Thane and Della were found deceased in the vehicle. The autopsy and the scene analysis confirmed it. There was no crime here. There was no sabotage. The investigation ruled it an accidental death. And that right there is the terrifying part. That word, accidental. It implies that this was a fluke, a roll of the dice. But when you look at the facts, really look at them, you see that this wasn't an accident. It was a probability. It happened during peak tourist season. The road was waking up. But the road doesn't care if you are a tourist or a ranger. It doesn't care if you have worked for the National Park Service for 20 years. It doesn't care if you know every statistic in the book. The investigation confirmed what Thane likely knew better than anyone. The road's infrastructure failed them. The lighting was inadequate for the conditions. The safety barriers were non-existent in the one spot where they were needed most. The margin for error at Milepost 11 is 0. Thane and Della had a momentary lapse. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe it was a deer. We will never know for sure. But because of where they were, that momentary lapse became a death sentence. On Interstate 81, that mistake is a scare. On the Blue Ridge Parkway, that mistake is a funeral. The lack of error margin is the real killer. We talk about the suicides, that 69% stat, because it's scary, it's spooky, it fits the ghost stories. But the mundane truth is scarier. The truth is that the road is designed in a way that punishes you for being human. Thane and Della were experts. They were the people who were supposed to be safe. They were the ones who warned others. And yet, they ended up as part of the statistics they managed. When the sun came up the next morning, the burnt patch of earth near the tree was the only sign they had been there. The tourists started driving through again. They stopped at the overlooks. They took pictures of the mountains. They didn't see the black scar on the tree bark. They didn't smell the lingering scent of burnt rubber. They drove right past Milepost 11, trusting the asphalt, trusting the yellow lines, trusting that the road was safe. But the road isn't safe. It's a machine. It's a machine that eats the careless, the unlucky, and even the experts. So the next time you find yourself driving that scenic route and the sun starts to go down, pay attention. Feel how the darkness gets heavy. Watch how the headlights get swallowed up by the trees. And remember Thane and Della. Remember that knowledge isn't a shield. You can know every curve. You can know every danger. You can have the badge and the uniform. But when you are moving 60 miles an hour through the pitch black, with no lights and no guardrails, you are just gambling with physics. And in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the house always wins. That silence you hear out there, that isn't peace. That is the sound of the road waiting for the next mistake. When veteran Blue Ridge Parkway Ranger Roy radioed for backup in 1983 saying he was seeing lights in the woods near Milepost 13, his colleague found his truck running with the doors wide open. Ranger Roy had vanished, adding his name to a dark mountain legend that's been consuming people along this deadly stretch of highway for over 50 years. Appalachia is different. You learn that fast when you work these mountains. It isn't like the Rockies, all jagged peaks and open sky. These mountains are old. They are worn down, covered in thick temperate rainforest, and filled with hollows so deep the sun barely touches the bottom. Sound works differently here. Distance works differently. And if you patrol the Blue Ridge Parkway alone at night, you learn that the darkness here has a weight to it. Roy knew that weight. He was 32 years old, with 8 years of badge time on the parkway. He wasn't some flatlander transfer. He specialized in the deep mountain sections. He knew the deadly curves, the sudden fog banks, and the spots where the radio signal just drops into a hole. He knew the history of the land, specifically the stretch near Milepost 13. That section has been eating people since the construction crews first broke ground in the 1930s. Workers would walk off to relieve themselves in the woods and never come back. Locals knew to stay away. Roy knew the stories, but he was a practical man. He trusted his training, he trusted his truck, and he trusted the heavy mag light on his belt. But on that Tuesday in November of 1983, none of that mattered. It was 11:23 p.m., a cold, clear night, the kind of night where the air is so sharp it hurts your lungs. Ranger Nolan was miles away, patrolling the lower sector. His shift had been quiet, boring even. Just the heater fan blowing and the tires singing on the asphalt. He was drinking coffee, thinking about heading home. Then the radio cracked. "Unit 33, come in." Nolan sat up. He knew Roy's voice. Roy was steady. He was the guy you called when you had a bear problem or a combative drunk. He didn't get rattled, but the voice coming through that speaker wasn't steady. It was pitched high, tight with adrenaline. "Unit 33, go ahead," Nolan responded. He kept his tone even. Standard procedure. "Unit 33, come in. Something's wrong. I'm seeing lights." That sentence hung in the air. Seeing lights. Roy wasn't talking about headlights or a campfire. The way he said it, breathless, like he was moving fast, made the hair on Nolan's arms stand up. "Unit 33, repeat. What is your status?" Nolan grabbed the mic, squeezing it hard. There was no answer. Just a sound that Nolan would never forget. It wasn't a scream. It was a harsh, tearing noise, like heavy fabric being ripped right next to the microphone. It was loud, violent, and then it cut off instantly. Silence. Just the empty hiss of the open channel. Nolan didn't wait for dispatch. He slammed his truck into a U-turn right in the middle of the road, tires smoking on the cold pavement. He hammered the gas he radioed for backup, his voice echoing in the small cab. He knew Roy wouldn't break radio silence unless it was life or death. 40 minutes. That's how long it took Nolan to climb the switchbacks and reach Milepost 13. Driving that fast on those winding roads is suicide, but Nolan didn't lift his foot. He stared into the trees as they blurred past, black walls of pine and oak. He kept trying the radio. "Unit 33, do you copy? Roy, come in." Nothing, just that dead air. Milepost 13 is a lonely spot. The road cuts through a section of forest that feels oppressive even in the daylight. The trees grow right up to the pavement. Rhododendron thickets, what the locals call hells, choke the ground underneath. It's a tangle you can't walk through without a machete. Nolan saw the reflectors of Unit 33 first. Roy's truck wasn't parked. It was stopped dead in the lane, angled toward the shoulder like he had jammed the brakes. Nolan pulled up behind it, hitting his takedown lights. The white glare washed over Roy's truck, lighting up the scene. Nolan stepped out, hand on his holster, thumb snapping the retention strap. It was quiet. Not just peaceful quiet. It was the kind of silence you feel in your teeth. No wind, no animals. Unit 33 was idling. Tup, 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 tup. The engine was running perfectly. Both doors were wide open, driver side and passenger side. They were flung out as far as they could go, like the truck had exploded outward. "Roy!" Nolan yelled. His voice just fell flat. The woods swallowed it. Nolan walked up to the open driver's door. He scanned the asphalt. About 10 feet from the truck, lying right on the center line, was Roy's flashlight. It was on. The beam was a solid white cylinder cutting through the dark. It pointed off the road, straight into the woods. Nolan followed the beam with his eyes. It disappeared into a patch of woods about 200 yards away. That's deep. That's way off the pavement. Roy had bailed out of a moving truck. He had left the engine running. He had run into the dark. And then, he had dropped his only source of light. Nolan moved to the truck cab. He needed to check the radio. He needed to call in the exact location. As he leaned in, a smell hit him. It wasn't pine needles or exhaust. It was sweet, sickly sweet. It smelled like copper and old flowers, with a sharp chemical bite underneath it. It was the kind of smell that triggers a gag reflex. Nolan ignored it and grabbed the mic hanging from the dash. He keyed it. Nothing. He looked at the radio face. The power switch was on, but the display was dark. He checked the portable radio in the charger. Dead. Nolan froze. These batteries are military grade. They are heavy bricks designed to run all shift. Roy had only been on duty for 4 hours. For that battery to be completely drained, zero power, was impossible. Physics doesn't work that way. Unless something drained it. Nolan backed out of the truck. He felt the cold then. It wasn't just the November air. It was a localized drop in temperature that went right through his jacket. He looked at that flashlight beam again. He looked at the 200 yards of pitch-black woods it pointed to. Every instinct in his body screamed, "Don't go in there." By morning, the mountain was crawling with cops. They launched a massive search. Over 50 rangers, state police, 2 specialized bloodhound teams brought in from the prison system. A helicopter chopped the air overhead, scanning with thermal cameras. They searched for 72 hours, 3 days of combing through brush so thick it tore your uniform to shreds. They found nothing. The dogs were the worst part. These were hounds that could track a scent across 3 counties in the rain. When the handlers brought them to the edge of the road, to the spot where Roy's flashlight had pointed, the dogs stopped. They whined. They tucked their tails and pulled back against the leashes. They wouldn't cross the tree line. It was like Roy had evaporated. There were no boot prints in the soft earth, no broken twigs, no sign of a struggle, just that abandoned truck with the dead radio and the sweet smell fading in the wind. Nolan spent those 3 days walking the grid. He kept thinking about the pattern. He knew the files. He knew that within a 5-mile radius of Milepost 13, people had been vanishing for 50 years. Hikers, campers, construction workers, now a ranger. On the 3rd day, a search team radioed in. "We found him." Nolan felt a wave of relief, followed by dread. "Location? Ravine, Sector 4, You better come see this." Sector 4 was 1.2 miles away from the truck. Nolan went down there. It was brutal terrain. Steep, rocky, covered in slick leaves and briars. It took them 40 minutes just to slide down into the bottom of the ravine. Roy was there. He was lying on his back. His arms were by his sides. His eyes were open, staring up at the gray sky. His expression wasn't peaceful. It was frozen in a mask of absolute terror. But he was clean. That was the thing Nolan couldn't process. If you run a mile through these woods in the dark, you get hurt. You fall. You get cut. Your uniform gets ripped. Roy's uniform was perfect. His boots were clean. There was no mud. There were no scratches on his face or hands. There were no defensive wounds. He hadn't fought anything. He hadn't fallen. It looked like someone had carried him there and set him down gently. Sheriff Bell came down to the site. He was an old mountain man himself. He looked at the body. He looked at the lack of blood. He looked at the impossible distance Roy had traveled without leaving a trail. "Accidental," Bell said. Nolan looked at him. "Accidental? Sheriff, his radio was drained. He walked a mile in the dark without a scratch. This isn't an accident. Bell just shook his head. We put accidental on the paper, Nolan. Because if we don't, we have to explain this. And we can't explain this. The pathologist confirmed it later. Cause of death, undetermined. No heart failure, no stroke, no poison. It was like his life had just been switched off, just like his radio battery. The case was closed. Ranger Roy became another file in the cabinet, another statistic for Milepost 13. But the Rangers know, they know that Roy was an expert. He knew these mountains. He didn't get lost. He didn't panic. He was hunted. Whatever is out there in those hollows, it doesn't hunt like a bear or a cougar. It doesn't leave marks. It doesn't bleed. It uses lights to lure you in. It drains the power from your machine so you can't call for help. It leads you into the dark, over a mile from safety, and it makes you lie down. Nolan still drives the parkway sometimes. He's retired now, but when he passes Milepost 13, he doesn't look into the woods. He keeps his eyes on the road. He remembers the smell, that sweet chemical stink. He remembers the open doors. And he remembers that if an expert with a gun and a radio can vanish without a fight, then nobody is safe. So if you're driving through the Blue Ridge at night and you see lights moving in the trees, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't try to figure out what it is. Because Unit 33 made that mistake, and the mountains never gave him back.